It came down to one order, one commander who chose differently. This is what happens next. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most crowded places on Earth. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide, but ships cannot use all of that space. The actual shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide. Imagine a giant highway where the world's oil flows through a tiny needle. In these waters, size usually means power. A United States destroyer is a mountain of steel. It is 500 feet long and weighs 9,000 tons. It is packed with the most advanced radar on the planet. It carries missiles that can hit a target hundreds of miles away. It is a $1 billion machine built to win wars. But in the Strait of Hormuz, that giant ship feels very small. The water is shallow and the coast is always close. Every day, the crew of that destroyer looks out at the horizon, and every day they see the gnats. These are the Iranian speedboats. They are small and made of fiberglass. They have 2 or 3 outboard motors strapped to the back. They look like something you would see at a lake on a summer weekend. But these boats are not for leisure. They carry heavy machine guns and multiple rocket launchers. Sometimes they carry a single large torpedo or a massive sea mine. They are fast and they are loud, and they are everywhere. For years, the relationship between these two forces has been a staring contest. The speedboats buzz around the destroyer like angry hornets. They zip across the bow and cut in front of the giant ship. They want to see how close they can get before the Americans flinch. The sailors on the destroyer watch through binoculars. They keep their hands on their weapons. They wait for a signal that today is different. Usually, the boats eventually turn away. The destroyer continues its path, and the tension fades for a few hours. This happens so often that it has become a routine. It is a dangerous dance that everyone has learned the steps to. But the problem with a staring contest is that someone eventually blinks, or someone decides to stop staring and starts swinging. On this day, the routine breaks. The sun is high and the heat is heavy over the water. The destroyer is moving slowly through the narrowest part of the strait. Suddenly, the radar screens start to glow with dozens of new contacts. These are not the usual 2 or 3 boats. 10 boats appear, then 20, then 50. They are coming from the Iranian coastline in a massive wave. They are not circling this time. They are heading straight for the side of the destroyer. On the bridge of the American ship, the alarms begin to scream. The commander looks at the screen and sees a cloud of white foam on the water. It is a swarm. The speedboats are moving at 40 knots. At that speed, they will close the distance in less than 2 minutes. The commander has to make a choice. If he fires first, he starts a global war. If he waits too long, his ship might be at the bottom of the ocean. He picks up the radio and gives the final warning. The Iranians do not slow down. The distance drops to 1 mile, then half a mile. The commander looks at his weapons officer. The order is given. The staring contest is over. The most powerful navy in history is about to find out if $1 billion can stop a fleet of plastic boats. Fire. The commander says the word calmly, but his heart is racing. The 5-inch gun on the bow of the destroyer speaks first. This gun is a masterpiece of engineering. It is designed to hit targets miles away with perfect accuracy. The first shell hits the water near the lead boat. A massive column of spray rises into the air. When the water falls, the lead boat is gone. There is only a patch of burning oil and floating wood. But there are still 49 boats coming. The destroyer was built to fight other big ships. It was built to shoot down missiles flying at 3 times the speed of sound. It was never meant for a knife fight in a phone booth. The crew on the deck starts using the smaller guns. These are the 25mm cannons. They sound like giant jackhammers tearing through the air. They fire hundreds of rounds every minute. The bullets walk across the water and find the fiberglass hulls. 2 more boats explode. Another one veers off, its engines shredded by metal. But the Iranians do not stop. They do not even slow down. They do the one thing the American computer systems hate. They fan out. Instead of coming in a straight line, they surround the ship. They come from the front, the back, and both sides at the same time. This is the turning point. A destroyer is a giant, but it only has a few sets of eyes. The radar is one of the most powerful in the world, but it was designed to look at the sky, not the surface of the water. In the choppy waves of the strait, the small boats keep disappearing and reappearing. On the screens inside the ship, the red dots are dancing. The system is overwhelmed. It is trying to decide which boat is the biggest threat. Is it the boat with the rocket launcher? Is it the boat that is just sitting still, acting as a scout? Or is it the boat that isn't shooting at all? The commander realizes his ship's own logic is working against him. He has to take manual control. He tells his gunners to fire at anything that moves. The ship becomes a ring of fire. The phalanx gun at the back of the ship starts to spin. This is the last line of defense. It is a massive machine gun that fires 4,000 rounds of tungsten bullets every minute. It sounds like a giant sheet of metal being ripped in half. It shreds a boat that gets within 500 yards. But the magazine depth is the problem. That is a fancy way of saying the ship is running out of bullets. Every time a gun fires, it uses up a piece of the ship's life. The cannons can only fire for so long before they overheat. The ammunition drums can only hold so many rounds, and the Iranians have plenty of boats to throw away. The speedboats start to fire back now. They aren't using high-tech missiles. They are using simple rockets and heavy machine guns. The bullets hit the side of the billion-dollar ship. Most of them bounce off the thick steel, but a destroyer is covered in delicate equipment. The machine gun fire hits the radar dishes. It smashes the glass on the bridge. It destroys the sensors that the ship needs to aim its big guns. The giant is being blinded by 1,000 tiny stings. The sailors on the deck are now fighting for their lives. They are using their own rifles to try and keep the boats away. It is loud, it is hot, and the smell of cordite is everywhere. The water is filled with debris and the screams of engines. 20 boats are gone now, but 30 are still coming, and they are now only 100 yards away. The crew can see the faces of the men on the boats. The technology doesn't matter anymore. The distance is too short for the computers to help. One boat slips through a gap in the wall of fire. It is smaller than the others. It isn't shooting. It is just an engine and a hull packed with 1,000 pounds of explosives. It is aiming straight for the middle of the destroyer. The gunners try to swing their weapons around, but the boat is too close and moving too fast. The commander watches through the broken glass of the bridge. The boat hits the steel. Everything goes white. The explosion is not like what you see in the movies. It is not an orange ball of fire that lasts for several seconds. It is a sharp, white flash that happens faster than a human can blink. In that 1 second, the force of 1,000 pounds of high explosives hits the side of the ship. The steel of the hull, which is thick enough to stop most bullets, folds like a piece of paper. The shockwave travels through the entire 9,000 tons of the ship. It snaps pipes, it shatters light bulbs, it throws sailors against the walls. Inside the engine room, the air is suddenly filled with high-pressure steam. The water of the Persian Gulf begins to pour into the hull. For a moment, there is a strange silence on the bridge. The alarms have stopped because the power is gone. The screens are black. The commander looks out and realizes his ship is no longer moving. The billion-dollar machine has been stopped by a boat that cost less than a luxury car. Outside, the surviving speedboats do not wait to see what happens. They turn around and head back toward the coastline. They have done their job. On the deck of the destroyer, the battle is no longer against the Iranians. The battle is now against the ocean. The ship is starting to lean to one side. Sailors are running through dark hallways with flashlights. They are trying to close heavy steel doors to stop the flooding. They are using hand pumps because the electric pumps have no power. But the hole is too big. The destroyer was designed to survive a hit from a missile. It was not designed to have a hole the size of a garage door opened below the waterline. As the ship leans further, the deck becomes hard to walk on. The commander has to make the hardest decision of his life. He gives the order to abandon ship. In the distance, the other ships in the carrier strike group are watching on their own radars. They saw the swarm, they saw the flash, now they see the signal from the destroyer's emergency beacon. The world is about to change in the next 10 minutes. Word of the attack reaches the oil markets in London and New York almost instantly. The price of oil does not just go up, it jumps. Traders realize that if a destroyer can be hit, no tanker is safe. Dozens of giant oil ships sitting in the Gulf simply stop moving. Their captains refused to enter the narrow strait. The flow of 20% of the world's energy just stopped. Back at the sinking ship, the first rescue helicopters arrive. They see the destroyer sitting low in the water. The bow is pointing up toward the sky. The crew is in the water, huddled together in small life rafts. They watch as the most powerful ship they have ever known disappears. First, the deck goes under, then the 5-inch gun. Finally, the tall radar mast slips beneath the waves. A massive bubble of air escapes the hull, and then the surface is flat again. The American Navy has not lost a destroyer in combat since the Second World War. The news of the sinking hits Washington like a physical blow. There is no more talk of de-escalation. There is no more room for diplomacy. The staring contest didn't just end in a fight. It ended with a giant lying on the floor. And the giant is about to get back up. The sinking of that destroyer sends a shockwave through every other ship in the fleet. For decades, the United States Navy believed it was untouchable. They had the best technology and the best training. But now, every captain in the Persian Gulf is looking at their own ship differently. They are realizing that their defenses have a limit. In naval circles, they call this magazine depth. It is a simple idea that has terrifying consequences. Every ship carries a set number of missiles and bullets. A destroyer might have 90 vertical launch cells for missiles. It might have a few thousand rounds for its smaller cannons. When the ship is in a normal battle, that feels like plenty. But against a swarm, the math changes completely. Imagine you are standing in a room with a handful of rocks. You are a great shot. You can hit anything. But if 100 people start throwing rocks at you at the same time, you have a problem. Even if you hit 50 of them, there are still 50 more. And once you throw your last rock, you are defenseless. This is what happened in the Strait. The Iranians didn't need to be better than the Americans. They just needed to have more targets than the Americans had bullets. This is the saturation attack. It is designed to overwhelm the computer brains of the ship. The radar on a destroyer is amazing. It can track hundreds of objects at once, but it can only tell the guns to fire at a few of them at a time. While the ship is busy killing 10 boats, 40 more are closing the distance. The Navy realized that their billion-dollar ships were playing a losing game of numbers. Every missile the Americans fire costs at least $1 million. Sometimes they cost $2 or $3 million. The boats they are shooting at cost maybe $50,000. The Americans are spending millions to destroy something that costs less than a truck. The Iranians can afford to lose 100 boats for every one destroyer they hit. The math of war is suddenly leaning in the wrong direction. Now, the rest of the fleet is on high alert. The carrier strike group moves further out into the open ocean. They want to get away from the shallow water and the coastline. They want to give their sensors more time to see the boats coming. But moving away means they can't do their job. The whole point of being in the Gulf is to keep the shipping lanes open. If the Navy is hiding in the deep water, the speedboats own the strait. This creates a massive problem for the commanders in Washington. They have more destroyers and more carriers. They could send 20 more ships into the region tomorrow. But if each of those ships has the same limit, they are just bigger targets. They are realizing that a cloud fleet of small boats is harder to kill than a single large ship. The sailors on the other ships are feeling the pressure. They aren't just looking for missiles on their screens anymore. They are staring at every small fishing boat and every civilian craft. They don't know which one is a merchant and which one is a bomb. The rules of engagement are changing by the hour. The commanders realize they can no longer wait for the Iranians to move first. If they wait until the swarm is close, it is already too late. The defense limits of the ship have forced the Americans into a corner. To protect the rest of the fleet, they have to stop the boats before they ever leave the dock. That means attacking the Iranian mainland. It means moving from a local skirmish to a full-scale air war. The chain reaction has moved from the water to the halls of power. The leaders in Washington are looking at the map. They see that their high-tech defense has a timer on it, and that timer just ran out. The shock did not stop at the water's edge. It traveled thousands of miles in a matter of seconds. It moved through fiber optic cables and satellite links. It landed on the desks of traders in London, New York, and Tokyo. Before the first rescue helicopter even reached the survivors, the world changed. the price of a barrel of oil began to climb. It did not just go up by a few dollars, it spiked. Traders realized that the giant oil tap of the world had just been smashed. 20% of the world's oil passes through that tiny needle of water. And now, that needle was blocked by a burning wreck and the threat of more swarms. But the real crisis was not just the price of oil. The real crisis was the insurance. Every giant ship that carries oil is covered by massive insurance policies. These policies allow the ships to move across the oceans safely. Without insurance, a ship cannot enter a port. It cannot unload its cargo. It cannot even leave the dock. The insurance companies watched the video of the destroyer sinking. They saw the speedboats and the fire. They realized their risk models were now completely wrong. They had assumed a United States destroyer was the safest place in the world. If that ship could be sunk, then a slow, thin-skinned oil tanker was a sitting duck. Within 1 hour, the insurance companies declared the Strait of Hormuz a total loss zone. That is a very specific term in the world of shipping. It means the risk of losing the entire ship is so high that the insurance no longer applies. Or, if it does apply, the cost of the policy is higher than the value of the oil. Suddenly, every tanker captain in the region received the same message. Stop where you are. Do not enter the strait. Do not move. Dozens of the largest ships on Earth simply dropped their anchors. They sat in the water like giant floating warehouses. The flow of energy to the rest of the world stopped. In cities thousands of miles away, people felt the hit at the gas pump. Prices doubled overnight. Then they tripled. People began to panic. They stood in long lines to fill their cars before the fuel ran out. Trucking companies stopped moving food and supplies because they couldn't afford the gas. The global economy is built on the idea that things move smoothly. It is built on the idea that a narrow piece of water will always stay open. That idea was now dead. World leaders scrambled to their phones. They called the White House. They demanded to know how this happened. They demanded to know how a billion-dollar navy could let a plastic boat win. The commanders in Washington were facing a nightmare. They knew they could send more ships. They could send 10 more destroyers. They could send 2 more aircraft carriers. But they also knew the math. If they sent more ships, they were just giving the Iranians more targets. They were just putting more billion-dollar assets into the total loss zone. The insurance companies weren't going to change their minds because the Navy sent more ships. They would only change their minds when the threat was gone. And the threat was not just a few boats anymore. The threat was the Hormuz Premium. That is the extra cost added to every barrel of oil because of the danger. That premium was now so high that it was breaking the world's banks. The chain reaction was now out of the military's control. It was an economic wildfire. The only way to put out the fire was to clear the strait completely. The Americans realized they couldn't just play defense anymore. They couldn't just wait for the next swarm. To get the oil moving again, they had to go on the attack. They had to strike the heart of the swarm. And that meant the war was about to get much, much bigger. The staring contest had turned into a sinking. The sinking had turned into a global economic collapse. And the collapse was now turning into a full-scale invasion. The world was holding its breath. Every person who turned on their car that morning was now a part of the conflict. The gnats had not just killed a giant, they had brought the entire world to a standstill. The decision-making process in Washington changed within minutes of the ship sinking. In the Situation Room, the mood was not just tense, it was heavy. The United States had lost a frontline warship to a group of speedboats. This was more than a military loss. It was a symbol of weakness that the world was watching in real time. The president was looking at a map of the Iranian coastline. The commanders explained that they could not just send another ship to replace the one they lost. The order was given for a decisive response. If they did, they were just sending more sailors into a trap. The goal was no longer to protect the tankers. This is a military term for hitting back so hard that the other side cannot keep fighting. But the swarm was not just boats sitting in a harbor. The goal was to destroy the entire swarm system before it could strike again. It was a network of hidden bases, underground tunnels, and mobile launchers. The speedboats were just the tip of the spear. The real power was hidden in the jagged rocks and caves along the coast. The United States Carrier Strike Group began to move. But they didn't move toward the strait. They moved further away. The carrier needed to launch its planes from a safe distance. The F-35 stealth fighters and the older F-18 Hornets took off from the deck. Their targets were the small fishing villages and hidden docks where the speedboats were kept. They also targeted the command centers that coordinated the swarms. The air was filled with the sound of jet engines as the first wave of strikes began. But Iran was waiting for this. They knew that once they sank a ship, the planes would come. This is where the escalation turned into a regional war. As the American jets approached the coast, the ground itself seemed to open up. The Iranians did not just have boats. They had thousands of anti-ship missiles hidden on trucks. These trucks were parked inside tunnels carved into the mountains. They could drive out, fire a missile, and drive back inside before a satellite could see them. These missiles were not like the speedboats. While the American planes were bombing the docks, dozens of missiles were launched at the fleet. They moved at hundreds of miles per hour. They skimmed just a few feet above the water. This created a multi-layered nightmare for the American fleet. They were already worried about the boats. Now they had to worry about the sky. The remaining destroyers in the fleet began to fire their defensive missiles. They were using up their magazine depth at a terrifying rate. The commanders realized that the staring contest had turned into a meat grinder. Every time they shot down a missile, they had one less round for the next swarm. They are not built for combat. The American logistics ships were now the most vulnerable part of the fleet. They are big, slow, and easy to hit. These are the giant cargo ships that carry the fuel, the food, and the ammunition. The Iranians knew this. Without these ships, the destroyers and the carrier would run out of supplies in a few days. They weren't just aiming for the superships anymore. They were going after the lifeblood of the fleet. If they could sink the supply ships, the American Navy would be forced to retreat. This is what naval experts call a logistics kill. It is a way to defeat a giant by starving it. The war was no longer about who had the best technology. It was about who could last the longest in a fight where everyone was losing. In Washington, the leaders realized they had reached a point of no return. But an invasion would trigger a response from other countries in the region. To stop the missiles and the boats, they would have to put boots on the ground. The ripple was spreading further and further. They would have to invade the coastline to physically take the caves and the tunnels. The entire Middle East was now a powder keg with a very short fuse. The sinking of one ship had started a fire that no one knew how to put out. The decisive response had only made the enemy fight harder. The sinking of one ship had started a fire that no one knew how to put out. They were waiting to see if it would ever end. And as the sun set over the Gulf, the horizon was glowing with the light of burning ships and falling missiles. The world was no longer waiting to see if a war would start. They were waiting to see if it would ever end. The airstrikes were supposed to be the end of it. The American commanders believed they could solve the problem from 30,000 feet. They sent the most advanced jets in the world to hammer the Iranian coastline. They dropped bombs that could hit a coin from 5 miles up. But the problem with fighting a swarm is that a swarm does not have a single heart. You can hit a dock, but the boats are already hidden in a cave. You can hit a command center, but the orders are being sent by a man on a motorcycle with a handheld radio. The American pilots found themselves playing a deadly game of whack-a-mole. They would destroy a group of boats, and 10 minutes later, another group would appear 10 miles away. The jets were moving at twice the speed of sound, but they couldn't see the tiny fiberglass holes hidden under camouflage nets. Every hour the war continued, the pressure in Washington grew. The public saw the images of the sinking destroyer on every news channel. They saw the empty gas stations and the rising prices. They wanted a solution that worked. The generals told the president that air power had reached its limit. To stop the speedboats and the hidden missiles, they had to go to the source. They had to put boots on the ground. This was the moment the escalation became impossible to stop. An invasion is not a quick strike. An invasion is a massive, slow-moving machine that requires hundreds of thousands of people. The United States began moving Marine expeditionary units toward the coast, but a land war in this part of the world is a nightmare. The Iranian coast is not a flat beach. It is made of jagged cliffs, deep canyons, and hidden bunkers. built into the rock. The Iranians had been preparing for this exact moment for 40 years. They didn't try to stop the Americans from landing. They waited until the soldiers were deep in the canyons. Suddenly, the war was no longer about high-tech ships and stealth jets. It was about young men with rifles in the heat and the dust. The ripple effect began to spread to the neighbors. Other countries in the region saw the invasion as a threat to their own survival. Some stayed quiet, but others began to pick sides. Supplies for the Iranian defenders started flowing across the borders. Advanced weapons from other world powers began to show up in the hands of the speedboat crews. The conflict was no longer a local fight over a shipping lane. It was becoming a global proxy war. Back in the United States, the cost of the war was becoming visible. It wasn't just the billions of dollars being spent every day. It was the realization that there was no exit strategy. You cannot defeat a swarm the way you defeat a regular army. You cannot force a plastic boat to sign a surrender treaty. The Americans found themselves stuck in a war they couldn't win but couldn't afford to lose. If they left, the strait would close again instantly. If they stayed, they would bleed men, money, for a decade. The decisive response had turned into a trap. The commanders looked at their maps and realized the truth. They had used the biggest hammer in the world to try and kill 1,000 bees. The hammer was heavy, and the bees were still stinging. The escalation had reached its peak, and now the world was looking at a map that had been redrawn in blood. The era of the big ship was being replaced by the era of the forever war. And the most powerful nation on Earth was finding out that size doesn't matter if you can't find the enemy. 20 years after the sinking of the American destroyer, the world's oceans look completely different. The era of the big ship is officially over. If you walk into any naval museum in the year 2076, you will see the giants of the past. You will see the models of the aircraft carriers that once ruled the waves. They look like dinosaurs now. They are massive, expensive, and easy to find. In the new world, being easy to find means being dead. The lesson from the Strait of Hormuz was learned by every nation on Earth. They realized that putting 5,000 sailors and $10 billion onto a single ship was a massive mistake. It was like putting all your gold in one glass box. One rock is all it takes to lose everything. Today, the most powerful navies do not have super ships. They have what we call the ghost fleet. If you looked out at the ocean today, you might think it was empty. But beneath the surface and hidden in the waves are thousands of small units. These are the cloud fleets. They are small, autonomous boats that carry no crew. They are made of carbon fiber and plastic. They are powered by the sun and the waves. They can sit in the middle of the ocean for months without moving. They are the ultimate gnats. If an enemy fleet enters their territory, the cloud wakes up. 1,000 small boats begin to move at once. Some are carrying cameras, some are carrying missiles, some are just carrying explosives. Losing one of these boats costs less than a single cruise missile. Losing 100 of them is just a small line on a budget. The magazine depth problem that killed the destroyer in 2026 has been solved. You cannot run out of bullets when the enemy has more targets than you have ammunition. The only way to win now is to have a bigger cloud. This has changed who holds power in the world. In the old world, only the richest nations could afford a navy. You needed billions of dollars and decades of training to build a carrier strike group. In the new world, any nation with a good software industry can build a lethal fleet. Sea power is no longer about steel and oil. It is about code and numbers. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer the center of the world's tension. The world stopped relying on that one narrow passage. After the total loss zone collapse, countries spent 40 years building pipelines and new trade routes. They learned that the world's economy was too fragile to depend on a single needle. The Hormuz premium forced the world to change its energy habits. The oil still flows, but it moves through thousands of miles of underground steel. The great staring contests are a thing of the past. There are no more human crews looking through binoculars at the horizon. The sensors do the staring now, and they never blink. The sinking of that one destroyer didn't just end a battle, it ended a 500-year history of how humans fought on the water. The ocean has become a place of invisible, automated war. It is quieter now, but it is more dangerous than it has ever been. The sailors who once manned the big ships are now technicians in air-conditioned rooms. They fight their wars from 1,000 miles away. They never feel the spray of the salt water or the heat of the engines. But they still remember the day the world changed. They still study the video of the white flash in the Strait of Hormuz. It is the first lesson every new recruit learns. Don't build a giant in a world of gnats. The shadow of that one sinking ship stretched across the next 1,000 years. It was not just the end of a battle or the end of a navy. It was the end of a very old human idea. For thousands of years, humans believed that being bigger meant being safer. We built massive stone walls around our cities. We built giant cathedrals to reach the sky. And we built enormous steel ships to control the oceans. We believed that if you put enough armor and enough guns in one place, you were untouchable. The day that destroyers sank, that belief died forever. It was the moment humanity realized that the era of the giant was over. For the next 10 centuries, the world's leaders never again tried to build a superweapon. They realized that in a world of smart machines, size is a weakness, not a strength. If you are big, you can be seen. If you can be seen, you can be hit. And if you can be hit, you can be destroyed by something much cheaper than yourself. This realization changed more than just how we fought wars. It changed how we built our entire civilization. Before the sinking, humans gathered together in massive cities. We built giant skyscrapers and huge power plants. We put all of our eggs in a few very large baskets. But after the lesson of the Strait of Hormuz, we stopped doing that. We began the scattering. We realized that a single city was just a bigger version of that destroyer. It was a target that was too big to miss. Over the next few hundred years, the giant cities began to fade away. People moved into smaller, connected communities spread across the map. Our power didn't come from one big plant. It came from millions of small solar panels. Our information didn't live in one big building. It lived in a cloud of tiny devices. The long shadow of the Iranian speedboats turned us into a distributed species. We became like the swarm itself. We became hard to find and impossible to kill. The oceans changed the most. For 1,000 years, the sea was a highway for giant ships. Today, it is a forbidden zone for anything larger than a fishing boat. The lethal horizon is what we call it now. The water is filled with millions of tiny, automated sensors. They are the descendants of those original speedboats. They wait in the silence of the deep water. Anything that tries to cross the ocean without their permission is found instantly. The days of the great explorers and the massive fleets are like a fairy tale to us now. We look back at the people of the 21st century and wonder why they were so brave, or why they were so foolish. They went to sea in metal boxes that cost more than entire countries. They trusted their lives to a computer and a layer of steel. They didn't realize that the world had already moved past them. The sinking of the destroyer was the first bell of a new age. It told us that the small would inherit the earth. It told us that the many would always defeat the one. And for 1,000 years, we have lived by that rule. The shadow of that ship is still there, beneath the waves of the strait. It is a monument to the last time humans tried to be giants. And it is a reminder of how easily a giant can be brought down. Looking back at the sinking of that destroyer, 3 hard truths remain. The first lesson is about the math of modern war. We spent decades building the most advanced technology in history. We believed that one perfect machine was better than 100 simple ones. But mass has a quality of its own. A billion-dollar ship is only as strong as its magazine depth. Once the bullets and the missiles are gone, the technology does not matter. We learned that you cannot win a fight if you are spending millions to destroy something that costs thousands. The second lesson is about the fragility of our world. The global economy is a giant machine that depends on very small, very narrow places. We built a world where 20% of our energy flows through a needle. We assumed that the needle would always stay open because the giants were guarding it. But the sinking showed us that the giants can be blinded. When the shipping stopped, the world did not just slow down. It broke. We learned that a connected world is a vulnerable world. The third lesson is about the nature of power. For a long time, power was something you could see. It was a fleet of ships, or a tall building, or a massive army. Today, power is invisible. It is 1,000 small sensors hidden in the waves. It is a line of code that controls a swarm of drones. It is the ability to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The giant died because it was too big to hide. The small survived because they were too many to kill. The fourth lesson is about the cost of being first. The American Navy was the most powerful in history. But being the most powerful means everyone is studying how to beat you. The Iranians didn't try to build a better destroyer. They looked at the destroyer and found its limits. They turned the Americans' own strength into a weakness. They used the narrow water and the high costs against them. We learned that the stronger you are, the more you have to lose. The final lesson is the simplest one of all. Never assume the staring contest will last forever. One day, someone will blink, and in that 1 second, the world you knew can disappear beneath the waves. This is a hypothetical scenario based on the historical record. Real outcomes would depend on factors no model can predict.